Hi, I wanted to cover what's called the fact pattern. It talks about the difference in interviewing someone between saying what happened and saying how did you respond to what happened. So that's what I'm going to go through. I'm going to go through some dialogue that came from a video that Alan Wade did back in 2018. It's on the Insight Exchange site that I always recommend, and it's video 11, and it's in Creating Conversations, and it's called the fact pattern. So the first scenario will be what happened to the person, and the second one is going to be how she responded to it, and then I'm going to say a little dialogue. So, what happened to you? He followed me down the sidewalk. Then what happened? He sped up to catch me. He grabbed me by the shoulders and threw me to the ground. He dragged me towards the bushes. He overpowered me and dragged me into the bushes. He held a rock over my head and threatened to kill me if I screamed. He called me derogatory names. He forced his mouth onto my mouth. He tried to undo my belt. He grabbed at my pant leg to pull them off. He overpowered me and vaginally raped me. That's the first scenario of what happened in this talk that he gave. Here's the second one, where we're actually realizing that the victim that this happened to was an active agent, and we need to understand that we can't get the facts unless we know what she did. What happened to you? He followed me down the sidewalk. How did you respond? I sped up. Then what happened? He sped up to catch me. And how did you respond? I moved to the side. He grabbed me by my shoulders and threw me to the ground. I rolled on the ground to get away. He dragged me into the bushes or towards the bushes, but I grabbed some roots of the tree so I could resist him dragging me into the bushes. But he overpowered me and he dragged me into the woods. I started to scream. He held a rock over my head and threatened to kill me if I screamed. I said, "You don't want to do this. You don't want to hurt me." He called me derogatory names and he forced his mouth onto my face, and I averted my face. He tried to undo my belt, but I stuck out my stomach so he could not undo it. He grabbed my pant leg and pulled them off anyway. I crossed my ankles so he couldn't get them off down at the bottom. He overpowered me and vaginally raped me. I went limp to avoid injury, and I went elsewhere in my mind. So those are two different scenarios. Going limp to avoid injury is not passivity. We are seeing much more than fight, flight, or freeze. We are seeing her attempting to work her way through a completely unmanageable situation, to get through it, to deal with it somehow, with hopefully her life. Which of these two descriptions gives you the most complete sense of the magnitude of the nature of violence? The perpetrator's actions in these two descriptions are identical. Isn't it interesting that by seeing the resistance, it actually helps us better see the violence? We can hear the struggle. And why is it important to hear the struggle? Number one, it highlights that she didn't want this to happen. So we clearly and immediately see that there was no consent. There was not even a gray area or mixed messages. She's telling us what she did and the facts of what she did. Two, it shows how the perpetrator was persistent in his continuation of violating her. So we could see here that a rape is not an action. It's not one action. It's a whole series of actions. It is a whole series of micro actions and responses over time in a sequence. At every point, the perpetrator anticipates her resistance. And more importantly, in my opinion, at every point, we could see that the victim resists. And at every point along the way, the perpetrator works to overcome and suppress that resistance. When you see the resistance, you could see the efforts of the perpetrator to overcome that resistance. If you do not show resistance, you will not see how the perpetrator worked to overcome it. You lose the most obvious, deliberate aspects of that violence. So when we are saying here that a victim's resistance is inherent, an inherent vital part of the fact pattern, it's not just framing it differently. It's not just creating a different narrative. It's not just telling her side of the story. It is fact.